The first time I saw my husband beg to hold a folder with my name on it, the room had already gone so quiet I could hear my own pulse. But that night had started with damp motel sheets, a flickering sign, and a wind that made the old office door sound like it was breathing. My name is Nora, I am 34, and before everything split open. I spent most of my life making other people comfortable enough to forget I was hurting. I worked at a regional clinic, packed school lunches before sunrise, tracked medicine, bills, school forms, birthdays, and every invisible task that keeps a family moving. I was married to Beckett for almost 11 years. We had 2 children, a daughter who still slept with one sock off, and a son who asked hard questions when adults wanted easy silence. For a long time, I mistook being useful for being loved. My father died on a gray Tuesday that smelled like rain on concrete. The reading of his estate felt less like business, and more like the last place his voice might still be hiding. The attorney's office was too cold. My younger sister, Sienna, came in wearing cream wool and a face arranged for victory. Her fiancé, Maddox, sat beside her with the relaxed confidence of a man who expected good news meant for someone else to improve his own life. My husband checked his phone until the papers were opened. The attorney read that my father's downtown loft properties and street-level retail units would transfer into a management trust controlled by my sister. Sienna inhaled like she had just been crowned. Maddox squeezed her hand. My aunt whispered that our father had always known who could handle real assets. Then the attorney turned one page and I became the punchline. He said my father's roadside boarding property, Lakeview Court, would pass to me in full, along with all structures and attached service rights. There was a pause, not grieving, not respectful, the kind of pause people use when they are trying not to laugh too soon. Lakeview Court was an old motor lodge near a service road outside town. Most people still called it a motel because calling it anything else felt generous. The paint had peeled for years, half the windows needed replacing. The office roof looked stitched together from old repairs. My father had owned it forever and refused every suggestion to sell it, but nobody understood why. In the family, it came up only as a joke. Sienna gave me a polished little smile. "Well," she said softly, "at least he remembered you." Even the attorney shifted in his chair. I did not cry. I did not defend myself. I only nodded because humiliation grows teeth when people see it land. On the drive home, Beckett kept one hand on the wheel and one elbow against the window like he was driving a stranger. I waited for something kind. What I got was a dry laugh. "A dead motel," he said. "That's what he left you." "It's still property," I answered. He finally looked at me. "Your sister got income. You got mold and vacancy." I turned toward the window before he could watch my face. That evening was supposed to be a family dinner. My aunt said we should all eat together because it was what my father would have wanted, which was ridiculous. My father hated performance and loved leaving before dessert. Still, they came. Sienna brought a bottle of wine we would never have bought. Maddox carried flowers from my kitchen and handed them to me like he was tipping staff. Beckett grilled in the backyard with a jaw so tight it looked painful. I told my children to stay upstairs and do homework slowly. The whole night felt staged. Sienna talked about investors, premium tenants, refinancing, and stabilizing the portfolio, as if she had built an empire in the hour since the will was read. My aunt nodded along like she was trying to warm herself at someone else's fire. Maddox kept asking Beckett about expansion plans for his logistics company in that careful tone that sounds polite, but is really just measuring status. Then, just as I set down the salad bowl, my aunt lifted her glass and said, "To blessings arriving in the right hands." Sienna smiled into her wine. Beckett looked at me, looked at them, and chose his side. "Well," he said, loud enough for the whole table, "one daughter inherited assets. The other inherited a place you rent by the hour if your life goes wrong enough." Maddox laughed first. My aunt made a startled sound and tried to hide it. Sienna pressed her lips together, pretending she was above it, which only made it worse. And there I was, standing with a serving spoon in my hand, while my own husband reduced me to a family anecdote. I set the bowl down so carefully it almost made me dizzy. My daughter had come halfway down the stairs by then. I saw her hand on the banister. My son stood behind her shoulder. They had heard enough to understand tone, if not detail. Shame climbed my throat like heat. I told them gently to go back upstairs. My daughter obeyed. My son looked at Beckett first. That nearly broke me. Dinner after that moved in thin, jagged motions. Forks, glasses, thin laughter. My body stayed at the table, but something inside me had already stepped away. When everyone finally left, I was rinsing plates when Beckett came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter like he had been, inconvenienced by my existence. "You embarrassed me today," he said. I turned off the water. "I embarrassed you?" "Yes, sitting there acting like that dump means something. Sienna and Maddox are making moves. They know how to build. You just absorb things. Time, money, patience." I stared at him, waiting for some flicker of conscience. There was none. "I helped build your business," I said. "I did your invoicing for 2 years without pay. I handled client calls at night. I watched the kids while you traveled." "And what do we have to show for your part?" he snapped. "A woman who gets handed a crumbling motel because even her own father knew she couldn't manage anything modern." I felt that one in my chest. He stepped closer. You want to prove me wrong? Fine, go live there. Take the kids if you want your little symbol so badly. Go play manager in the middle of nowhere. There are sentences that do not feel real even while they are happening. That was one of them. I should say I screamed. I should say I threw something, but my rage went colder than sound. I looked at the family photos on the fridge, the school calendar I had filled in by hand, the man who had used my steadiness as furniture for years, then called me useless the second I no longer reflected the life he wanted to show off. So I complied. Not loudly, not dramatically, calmly. I went upstairs. I packed 2 overnight bags, the inhaler pouch, tomorrow's school clothes, chargers, favorite blankets, and the little stuffed fox my daughter pretended she had outgrown. My son asked if we were going somewhere fun. I told him we were going somewhere quiet. My daughter studied my face for a long moment and did not ask anything at all. We left before midnight. The road out to Lakeview Court cut through dark stretches of highway where every truck sounded too close and too temporary. My children fell asleep one by one. I drove with both hands locked on the wheel, and the kind of clarity that arrives only after something terrible becomes official. I was no longer trying to decode my husband's cruelty into stress, jealousy, or a phase. He had made himself plain. Lakeview Court appeared all at once under a weak spill of security lights. The sign still leaned left. Several letters no longer worked, so from a distance it looked like a place trying to forget itself. Wind pushed wrappers across the parking lot. The office porch light flickered, brightened, then steadied like an eye forcing itself open. I sat with the engine off for a moment. No television from the next room, no dishwasher hum, no footsteps overhead, just the ticking of hot metal cooling beneath the hood. Inside, the air smelled like cedar cleaner, dust, and old rain. Not pleasant exactly, but not rotten either. Someone had shut this place down carefully. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Neglect has a different smell. I found keys on labeled hooks behind the desk and chose a corner unit that looked cleaner than the rest. The beds were narrow but solid. The linen closet still held sealed blankets. I tucked the children in without waking them fully, then stood between their beds for a long time, watching their chests rise and fall. I had never felt more frightened. I had never felt less willing to go back. Sometime after midnight, with the children asleep, and the old ice machine clicking outside, I returned to the office because exhaustion was impossible, and anger needed a direction. The desk held guest ledgers, utility receipts, supply invoices, and a jar of dead pens. I sat in my father's chair and opened drawer after drawer, as if grief had turned me into someone hunting for instructions. Then I noticed something that did not belong. Behind the brochure rack was a narrow wall panel in darker wood than the rest. It was almost invisible until I moved closer. A small brass key was taped beneath the lip of the desk drawer, placed where only someone deliberately searching would find it. The tape looked newer than everything else in the room. My fingers went cold. For one suspended second I thought of every ugly possibility. Debt, liens, proof that I had inherited exactly what everyone thought I had. I slid the key into the lock. Behind that panel was not a closet. It was a narrow records room with a humming climate unit, metal shelves, and banker boxes lined in perfect order, each marked with dates from the current year. And on the center table, under a single lamp, was a thick cream file stamped with a name I recognized from highway signs all over the county. I pulled the file closer and stared at the stamped name until the letters stopped swimming. It belonged to Carrick Infrastructure, the company buying parcels along the eastern corridor for a private medical campus and emergency access route. Most people in town had only heard rumors. My father had collected proof. Inside were site maps, survey overlays, drainage revisions, and signed easement drafts. Lakeview Court was not beside the future project. It was sitting in the middle of the only clean access point between the highway and the land Carrick had already secured. The motel rooms meant almost nothing. The back acreage, frontage rights, and utility access meant everything. I kept turning pages, slower now, because each sheet changed the shape of my breathing. My father had met with engineers. He had refused early offers. There were letters from attorneys, a traffic study, and one sealed envelope with my name on it in his rough block handwriting. I opened that last. Nora, if this reaches you, it means they all looked at the motel and saw what they wanted to see. Let them. The valuable thing is never the first thing loud people notice. I left this to you because you know how to wait without folding. The men who came here talked to me like I was old. Your sister talked to me like I was slow. Your husband talked to me like you were temporary. I listened. There is a meeting already requested with Carrick. The date is in the blue folder. Do not bring anyone. Do not sell in fear. And do not let anyone convince you that being quiet means being weak. What froze me was not only the value of the land, it was the last line, written harder than the rest. I know what Beckett has been asking me for. My whole body went still. I searched the shelves until I found the blue folder. Tucked inside were printed emails from months earlier. Beckett had contacted my father twice without telling me. Not to check on his health. Not to help. He had asked whether Dad would transfer a controlling interest in Lakeview Court early for tax efficiency and family planning. In a later message more bluntly, he suggested folding it into a joint business entity. he managed. My father had written one note in the margin. No, he is counting assets that are not his. I sat there with the papers spread around me while the little climate unit hummed in the wall. The hurt came first. The anger that followed was calmer, colder, useful. Near dawn, I found an old coffee machine in the office, kitchenette, and made something bitter, enough to keep me upright. When the children woke, I told them we were having an adventure morning. We ate packaged muffins from a supply box and watched trucks roll by the frontage road. My daughter said the place looked lonely. I told her lonely things sometimes wait for the right people. By noon, I had called the number in the blue folder. The woman who answered from Carrick did not sound amused. She sounded prepared. When I gave my name, there was a brief pause, then a shift in tone. "We've been hoping to hear from you," she said. She asked whether I could come in that afternoon. I packed the children into the car and drove to a temporary project office near the county line. A man named Alaric met me in a glass conference room with 2 planners and an attorney. Nobody smirked when I said motel. Nobody used the voice people reserve for women they assume do not understand money. They laid out the maps. They explained the emergency access corridor, the zoning change already submitted, the value of the frontage, the water tie-in, the service lane. Lakeview Court was the missing piece that made their plan efficient instead of delayed and expensive. Then Alaric slid a draft term sheet across the table. The first number made my hands go numb. The second number, tied to an ongoing ground lease on part of the frontage, made me set the paper down and breathe. Through my mouth, "I need independent counsel," I said. His expression did not change. "That is the correct answer." I hired a real estate attorney the next morning, a woman named Greer with steel gray eyes and no use for theatrics. She reviewed everything, and by the end of the first hour told me 2 things. First, my father had protected the property from marital claim as far as inheritance. Law allowed because he had transferred it to me separately, and documented his intent with painful clarity. Second, if Beckett had pushed me to sign anything after the reading of the will, Greer wanted copies immediately. I almost laughed. "He hasn't asked me to sign," I said. He threw me out. Greer leaned back. "Good." Then he helped with timing. By that evening, my phone had become a parade of performance. My aunt called to say families say regrettable things when grieving. Sienna sent a message asking whether I had settled in at the cute little inn, which told me she believed I was still humiliated enough to answer carefully. Beckett called again and again, then left a voicemail coded in fake patience. "You've made your point. Bring the kids home. We can discuss what to do with the property like adults." I did not answer. 2 days later, Sienna invited the family to a celebratory dinner downtown because one of her retail tenants had renewed on favorable terms. The old version of me would have declined. The new version understood timing. I wrote back that I would come. Greer told me not to sign anything, not to drink anything stronger than sparkling water, and to bring the slim black folder she had prepared. "You do not need a speech," she said. "Truth is lighter to carry." The private room glowed with warm lighting and polished glass. Sienna wore triumph like perfume. Maddox was already talking at the far end of the table. Beckett stood when I entered, relief flashing across his face so fast it was almost embarrassing. "Nora," Beckett said, pulling out a chair. "Thank God." I smiled politely and sat down without touching him. Dinner moved in waves of self-congratulation. Sienna mentioned occupancy projections for her lofts. Maddox praised her instincts. Beckett kept trying to catch my eye, the way men do when they think a softened voice counts as remorse. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I want to say something. I was harsh the other night. Grief does ugly things. Nora, you know I only want what's best for our family." There it was, the public repair designed to make any refusal look cruel. I folded my napkin beside my plate. "That's interesting," he blinked. "What is?" "The part where you say family." Sienna shifted in her chair. Beckett reached for my hand. I moved mine to the black folder instead. "I spent the last few days learning exactly what you wanted from my father before he died," I said. His face changed first, then Maddox's. Sienna's came last. I opened the folder and slid photocopies onto the table. The email sat there between the wine glasses and candlelight like a second meal. Beckett looked down, then up, then down again. "You went through private papers. My father left them for me." "That doesn't prove anything," he said too quickly. "It proves you tried to get him to transfer the property around me," I said. "It proves you discussed placing inherited land into a company I did not control. It proves that while you were calling me useless at dinner, you already knew the motel mattered." Sienna stared at him. "You knew?" He turned toward her, panicked now. "I only knew it might be part of a future corridor. Nothing definite." Maddox let out a low breath. "You said it was a write-off." I lifted one more page from the folder, this one carrying a letterhead from Carrick, and the executed memorandum Greer had allowed me to share. "No," I said. "You called it garbage because you thought I would hand it over faster if I felt small." The room went silent. "I have entered a development agreement," I said. "I kept a continuing interest in the frontage lease. My children are secure. I will not be returning to the house. Beckett will be hearing from my attorney. Also, because he forced me and the kids out in anger, Greer suggested I document everything, which I did." I let that sit. Beckett's voice cracked around the edges. "Nora, don't do this here. You already did this here. I said gently. Just not at this table. At the other one. Remember? Sienna looked sick. Maddox pushed his chair back. We're done, he muttered. Beckett tried one last time after dinner, catching up to me in the hallway outside the private room. His voice had lost all polish by then. I made a mistake. Yes, I said. I was angry. Yes, I can fix this. I looked at him for a long moment and felt something almost peaceful settle into place. No, I said. You can watch it stay broken. By early spring, demolition crews had removed the worst of the old motel buildings while preserving the strip. Greer told me never to surrender cheaply. The development signs went up, then the grading started, then the steel. The first time I drove the children past the site, my son pressed his face to the window and said it looked important. My daughter asked whether Grandpa knew this would happen. I told her yes, I think he did. We live now in a bright rental home with a small porch and too many library books on every flat surface. I sleep without listening for contempt in the next room. Beckett sends formal messages through lawyers. Sienna no longer speaks to me with pity. In public, people call me strategic, which is funny, because all I really did was stop apologizing for seeing clearly. My father did not leave me a dying motel. He left me the one thing nobody around me knew how to recognize until it was too late. He left me leverage, land, and the last word.